Guys, welcome back to another episode of A2 the Show. Today we have an interesting guest. We have Dr. Josh McConkey, who is an American emergency physician, U.S. Air Force Reserve colonel, author, and political candidate currently running for governor of North Carolina. With more than 2 decades of experience in emergency medicine and military service, he has served as a flight surgeon and medical commander while advocating for stronger education systems, expanded healthcare access, particularly in rural communities, and responsible economic policies. His campaign draws on his background in leadership, public service, and healthcare to promote practical solutions for North Carolina's future. Dr. Josh, thank you for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Dr. Josh, we want to start from the beginning of your service. Um, you know, you went into the military, done so many different, you've been involved in so many different fields of the military, and then going into politics. We'll later talk about why do military men eventually go into politics as well. We've seen there's a lot of people who do that, but maybe you can give us a bit of the background story of why that was something that you wanted to do.
Yeah, for me, I think your perspective on the world changes quite a bit when you've been overseas. A lot of people in the
Mhm.
United States live a very insular life. I mean, I grew up in rural western Nebraska. There are still tons of people in my hometown that have barely left the state, let alone just the Midwest or even the country. In fact, if you go to a lot of some rural areas and where I grew up, there's most people don't even have passports. So, your the world view changes quite a bit when you've been overseas. And for me personally, just what I see as an emergency physician every day, and then couple that with what I've dealt with as a military commander, that's really where it started to change my perspective, soured a little bit on some of the current leadership that's in power right now. Certainly here in North Carolina, they're just not in touch with reality. When you talk about soft on crime policies, the healthcare policies, COVID, shutting down schools and churches. Unfortunately, I deal with that aftermath of the bad decisions. So, as an emergency doctor, I see the entire generation of kids, especially right here in North Carolina, that were shut out of schools and churches during some very formative years. And the mental health issue is huge. So I see the anxiety, the depression, and suicides. And the last suicide that I saw was about a month and a half ago, and it was a 14-year-old kid. Got a hold of a parent's handgun. My son is 14 years old. Like, man, that strikes way too close to home. And it's unfortunately a growing problem. And then on the military side as well, when you see these young kids that want to, serve their country and join the military, boy, those communication problems, the lack of resiliency skills, they want to quit at a moment's notice. And after 24, 25 years of service myself, I'm concerned. So that's one of the big reasons why, I want to get into politics because, winners make policy. I figured that out real quick. I lost in my congressional race in 2024. I was outspent by $12 million in a
Wow.
primary,
Oh,
which
wow.
is it just shows you. I think the focus on a lot of American elections is not about substance. It's not even about policy. It's whoever has the most money, and that's not good for anyone. So I've got to do this the hard way. That's why I'm getting out there so active on social media and a lot of public speaking because I'm 2 years out. So my race is 2028, but I don't
Yep.
have $12 million, so I got to do this the hard way. I actually have to be qualified and then get out there and talk with people. So I'm having fun with it though.
You're pulling off the Zoran Mabdani tactics. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, but I don't know how much money he had, but I know he didn't start out with much.
Exactly. He's mainly go through social media and pushing on the marketing side, but like grassroots style.
Yeah.
But that's great. I mean, and hopefully it does work for you. We're praying for you. Um,
I hope so.
Dr. Josh, we wanted to learn more about why did you choose to serve in the military? What made you to decide to, and why did you pick also the Medicorps specifically? Why didn't you like maybe join the army or the navy or you know, why did you choose to save lives instead of take lives?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. So for me, I grew up in a small town. So my dad was a railroader. My grandfather and my great grandfather were railroaders as well. So I was the first McConkey to go to college ever. and my stepmom was a nurse. And so, she told some great stories in the emergency departments in Omaha, Nebraska back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, just crazy stories that for a kid in a rural small town, it just sounded insane. And
Yeah.
I gravitated towards medicine, being the math and science nerd. And I was born in the 70s and grew up watching Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now. If you're into some of those like the Vietnam movies, just fantastic
Yeah.
movies. And that's what I grew up watching. That's what I looked up to. I was looked up to Vietnam veterans. The 60s and 70s were quite chaotic here in the United States. There were some
Hmm.
cultural revolutions going on and things got crazy, but I've always had tremendous respect for those that served in the military. When you look at the greatest generation, like the World War II generation that, you know, saved the world, my grandfather was late in World War II, was with the Merchant Marines, and then in the Army, I believe, as a telegraph operator. So I've always
Wow.
wanted to join the military. I had an ROTC scholarship in college, but ended up going to a very small school in Western Nebraska called Shadron State College. They did not have an ROTC program. So I had a different scholarship there called the Rural Health Opportunities Program. And that basically got me into medical school, at a very young age. I still had to finish undergrad, but it was a wonderful opportunity. So those things kind of came together with emergency medicine and the military. And I did join the Army first. So it was the Army National Guard, but this was 2000. This is before 9/11, and the
Mm.
recruiter was
Yeah.
very smooth. Yeah. They're just talking about, hey, we've got these great medical missions in Honduras and Belize and all these sweet tropical locations. I'm like, hey, that sounds fantastic. I did jungle search and rescue course down in Belize, and then 9/11 hit, and it was much different
Mhm.
than advertised. And we have basically been at war my entire career. So, just wanting to make sure that men and women have great medical care. And I don't, I've seen a lot of death and destruction. I'm not into taking lives. I save lives. I don't take them. And I guess that's just me, who I am.
Mhm. Um, so the 9/11 is definitely a touchy subject in the US, depending on who you ask and from which area the person is. And recently, there's been a lot of build-up of uh, and hype around the concept that this was an inside job or potentially actually organized and orchestrated by Mossad, you know. So I we kind of want to understand what is the perspective of maybe the North Carolinians or your opinion, since you understand how they think. What what's the outlook on what happened and like what caused that war? Because we all know like that was kind of like the main push, the main like the final nail in the coffin that allowed the start of the Iraqi war.
Yeah. For me personally, I've never got into a lot of those conspiracy theories.
Hmm.
Growing up in rural Western Nebraska, man, just the patriotism and that service to country. I mean, the United States was attacked. I watched the Twin Towers. I mean, literally on 9/11, I was in my Army uniform. It was doing a rural rotation in family practice. So there's old
Hmm.
school Doc Forney, been doing it. I think he practiced for 50 years, just this old school, like rural doctor. And so I'm out there. I mean, you deliver babies, there's minor surgeries. It's just medicine the way it was supposed to be. You can't really find guys like that anymore. Everyone wants to be specialized. But I
Hmm.
listened to the radio as the first plane had crashed into the tower, and they're describing it, and it was so unreal to me because I had toured New York City. So in 1996, we marched in the Fourth of July parade in Washington D.C. for my high school band. I was a senior in high school, and then we also toured Philadelphia and New York City. So I knew that those were just huge buildings, and there were more people in those towers than in my entire town where I grew up. So I'm back in my hometown, and I stopped. I literally was driving to the office. I drove back to my parents' house and then turned on the TV. And then you watch the second plane hit. And it just was a surreal moment. It was just one of those life changing, world changing moments. And, when you talk about the individuals involved on that, and then like later on in 2011, when Osama bin Laden was actually found, I was in New Zealand. So I had such that that war and that event changed my life so much from a kid in some rural hick town middle of nowhere to 2007 serving in Iraq and seeing lots of death and destruction. When I came back, I
Hmm.
actually moved to New Zealand for a while. And so when they caught Osama bin Laden, I was in New Zealand in the emergency department, and my wife called me on the phone. And it was super emotional because I just seen so much like destruction and so much craziness, unfolding from those events on 9/11, that when they finally caught him, it was that was a pretty emotional event. So yeah, the conspiracy stuff I don't get too much into.
Okay, okay. I wanted to see if we could get a potential personal story of or a personal experience that you had when you were serving over there. Like
Yeah.
maybe something that you'd be willing to share with our audience just to so we can get to know you a bit more, Dr. Josh.
Yeah, it's a beautiful country. And when they talk about the Middle East, I think most people in the United States just think of like a big desert. And that's just
Yeah.
not true. There's some fantastic, beautiful areas. And when you look at like Iraq, that cradle of civilization, like the Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, that's
Hmm.
really where civilization began. And I
Yeah.
got to see some very interesting the ziggurat. And that was down by Talil, I believe, and there was just some beautiful. I mean, it predates the Egyptian pyramids. So when you look at that history, there was some incredible just beauty. And someday when the world is a little bit more stable and it's not so crazy, maybe that'll be a tourist destination for some people. I think we're probably a ways off from that right now. But when you talk to World War II veterans, I mean, there's hardly any of them left anymore.
Hmm.
Korean War or Vietnam veterans. I know Vietnam is a big tourist place now, and that's you talk with Vietnam
Yeah.
veterans, and they want to go back to some of those locations. And even though there was a lot of death and carnage, just to see how things have changed, and maybe it'll be the same way there in Iraq someday. But right now, it tends to be a little bit unstable, and we have more unrest now, of course. So there's some beautiful areas that I think a lot of people don't know about.
Mm. I'm curious to see your perspective on how the picture and the narrative was painted about Iraq. Because you say how beautiful a country it is, and at the same time you mentioned the instability in it. Um, this definitely was not helped when because of the war.
Oh,
And the narrative that was painted was that, Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He was out to get, all of the US targets, and he wanted to use those weapons. But then reality hit, and we found out that there were none of those weapons. And the reasons of the invasion were mainly commercial. Um, how does that also affect um, your perspective as a veteran, someone who served, and you had a certain belief or a certain purpose when you were going there, only to find out that it wasn't for the same reasons.
yeah, those were completely untrue. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And
Hmm.
when you look at, so I think for the soldiers, for the airmen, those Marines, people that served, you're there for the man or woman next to you. And for me,
Right.
regardless of the reasons that we were there, I wanted them to have great medical care and to
Hmm.
try to save as many lives as possible. And you see the
Hmm.
politics of war up close. So I saw the fraud. I was there. So when I had a Humvee that I was driving around in Balad, and there's some third country nationals just running like a little gas station. None of them speak a lick of English. You just pull up to the vehicle. They're filling in I don't know how many gallons of fuel, and then they write something completely incomprehensible. I have no idea what they're writing. I have no idea what they're saying. They're just like sign here and move on. So I mean, do they give me 8 billion gallons? Do they give me 10 gallons? You could
Yeah.
see the business side of things, and on that contractor side, and it soured me a little bit. That's kind of where you start to lose some faith in some of the civilian leadership. And when you talk about some of those motivations and reasons for wanting to run, um, for politics, you just see history repeat itself over and over. And that war in Iraq, for many reasons, you basically created and contributed to the beast that is Iran. So Saddam was a very, very bad dude, very evil guy, killed lots of his own people, gassed his own people. You had,
Hmm.
like, just politically, you had a check on Iran. So the two of them were mortal enemies. And at one point, the United States government was supporting Saddam, like in the '80s.
Hmm.
And so that's where you
Yep.
see the CIA games and the government and the politics. And then all of a sudden, now he's the bad guy. And he's got weapons of mass destruction. So that whole premise behind the Iraq war turned out not to be true, but it doesn't change how you feel as a military member, because lots of people felt we shouldn't have been in Vietnam either, right? That was a very
Right.
political war. But when you're there for the man and woman next to you, and the political reasons don't really make any difference. Like, you're going to live here or you're going to die here, and you see terrible death and destruction. So it shapes your view of things and of politics. I probably have a little bit more pessimistic view than most people on politicians. The majority of
Hmm.
them are clowns. The majority of them are narcissists with just personality disorders that have no business being in any leadership whatsoever. But
Yeah.
that's who has the most money, and that's who ends up running, and that's who ends up winning. So I am going to break that mold one way or another.
I mean, just that, just you mentioning all this and you're sharing your perspective, like a wave of questions is just hitting me because like there's so many ways we could go into this, so many things to discuss. Like we could talk about like why politicians are so good at manipulation. Why do people listen to them if they're not actually doing the right thing? Why is it a recurring pattern, you know? Also, for example, with the US, like mentioning the US, the, the CIA games that were being played, how they supported Saddam back in the 80s. And maybe we can go from there, um, seeing with how the US tries to make those decisions about who should be in charge and who should be in power. And we're seeing obviously this happening like right now in live with Iran. Is Does the US actually have any authority at this point to make these kind of decisions? Since the past has been telling us consistently that the decisions they've been making on these matters have not been in the best interests of other nations. They have been in the best interest maybe for the US and only the US. So when the statements that are being made that they are freeing the people or liberating the country or and helping the nation, how much truth is there to it?
Well, that one, I think is 100% truthful on that. So there's no debate that the Iranian regime has been trying to murder Americans for decades and decades. When you go back to the barracks bombing, to invading the embassy and holding people hostage in 1979, to, I mean, me personally being in Iraq, a majority of the weapons and training for the insurgency had come through the Iranians. So
Mm.
I was there in 2007. So there was a span of 2 weeks where they were shooting down American helicopters, and they had
Mhm.
received training in some acoustic software from Iran. And 2 weeks before I got there, they killed an American flight surgeon when they shot down a helicopter, and it was Colonel Allgood. And then the day I landed in theater, they shot down a helicopter. So literally, hey, welcome to Iraq. It's crazy. You're going to die here.
Mm.
And it was shocking. It took me really a couple of weeks to adjust to that type of environment. And then you see just last month with the Iranian regime, they murdered, so the numbers, I think officially 20, 30,000 people, could be as many as 40 or 50,000. I have an Iranian American who's a neighbor of mine, and we sit down, had a drink and chatted. And the stories that are coming out of there, I mean, they literally, when you try to put that into perspective, so in a 2 or 3 day span of it was just multiple days, but that's a lot of killing in a couple of days. So there was just a horrific regime. And they
Mhm.
wake up every single morning just wondering how they could kill more Americans. So there's no question there that authoritarian regime needed to go a long time ago. And then when you couple that with their just hell bent pursuit on getting nuclear weapons, that cannot happen. So they will use those weapons. Israel, Iraq, just Saudi Arabia, like nowhere was safe. Like that Iranian regime was crazy. Not crazy like
Hmm.
North Korea, not crazy, evil, wicked, smart like Putin, but just flat out crazy. So there was no world where that could happen. And I think any leader from really any background that had that type of information would have made the same decision without hesitation. You can't let that Iranian regime get a nuclear weapon. I mean, the people around the world, wherever you go, you realize that we're all on the same planet here. And we all want to
Mm-hmm.
take care of our children and provide education and put food on the table. Like people are good, but it's the governments that screw it all up. And when you see that type of an Iranian regime, this is now the opportunity for those Iranian people to step up and take their country back, and they have hope for the first time. And my neighbor had a great quote. He said, "Josh, this is what the French felt like during the start of D-Day." And I was like, really? And you try to think about it. He's like, listen, it's been an oppressive regime for close to 50 years. And now
Hmm.
you see that leadership get toppled, just no different than, the start of D-Day and Nazi tyranny. You could start to see the beginning of the end because it's not over. There's a long way to go. But that's what he's an Iranian American. He can't even go back home because he's, they're they're just going to torture him and do
Mm-hmm.
who knows what. So I mean, he still stays in touch with family and friends. That's what he told me. So I think
Hmm.
even most Iranian citizens are very excited about this. They were happy to see that overthrow, and there's still a lot of work to do, but they've got to do it for themselves. I do not support American boots on the ground.
Okay. There's definitely quite a lot to unpack from
Mhm.
that statement. I won't go into the statistics and the personal experience that you've gone through because there might be a bit of a conflict or disagreement that we might not see
Sure.
that we might
Yeah.
eventually lead to a agree to disagree point.
Yeah, that's all right.
But
Yeah.
something that
You got to
That's
be
all
able to
right.
talk,
something
Yeah.
got to have the
Mm-hmm.
dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
something that definitely stuck out for me, and which I think is much more important to focus on, would be the concept of the nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Because this has definitely been a topic that has been mentioned in the Middle East about Iran having nuclear weapons since the 90s. Netanyahu has consistently been mentioning this over and over that in the next, there's multiple videos of him doing conferences where him warning, saying that Iran is going to have nuclear weapons in the next 2, 3 months. And that's since the 90s. Until now, they don't have any nuclear weapons. So the possibility of a threat of Iran having nuclear weapons is very questionable at this point, or even at any point, because they've constantly been in negotiations with the US, with Israel, about the nuclear program in general, not weapons, just the program. So there was never a stage of like them actually having weapons. While on the other hand, we see a complete hypocrisy when we notice that Israel does have nuclear weapons. They conceal how much weapons, but it's basically public news, public information that they have a nuclear weapons arsenal, and they're the only country in the Middle East that does have it, which is, I think that is the most threatening concept, that they are the ones that are holding on to these nuclear weapons, and even in their fight with Iran, they have threatened to use those nuclear weapons to convince the USA to bomb Iran, like in the first attacks, not in the current war. And there was mentioning of them potentially using those nuclear weapons so that they can convince the USA to attack. So this kind of brings back the topic of weapons of mass destruction. You know, like the same argument that was used in Iraq, is it being applied on Iran again? And is this just a way to kind of convince people that this is something that is viable and should be done?
So yeah, first of all, if you go back to like the Israel having nuclear weapons, I think history plays out there. Uh, they only have them for a defensive reason, and you'll see some of the propaganda that they kind of threaten to use it for this or that. That's not true. So I get a lot of the classified briefings, and I've served for 25 years. But Israel, I would
Mm,
probably just agree to disagree there. But I mean, they've been fighting for their lives since the inception of that country. I mean, every several years they've been attacked by several, like Arab states. You go back to the 60s and the 70s and Yom Kippur War and man, so they've always had that as a for like defensive posturing, which is clearly necessary when you look at the whole totality of their history since what, like 1947 or so. And then
hmm
with Iran, like the nuclear weapons, it's completely different because they've told everyone that they're after them. And they said, you can't stop us. Like they've been open about it. So to the point where when they opened the negotiations, when Wickoff and Jared Kushner went into negotiations when they tried to handle some of this diplomatically, the envoy for Iran literally walked into negotiations to start the entire thing, walked into the room, said, we have this many kilograms of weapons grade plutonium and uranium. You can't stop us. F you. That's essentially what was said. I'm paraphrasing there.
Mhm.
But that's how they walked into negotiations. So there's no question that they were after nuclear weapons. And just under no circumstances could you let that happen. Even I don't think there's a lot of people or even leadership within the Middle East, even the surrounding, Arabian countries. There's no one wanted Iran to have nuclear weapons. It's completely unstable, and you just look at it economically for them. Iran had cost all the Arab nations just gazillions of dollars over the decades. Every time
Mhm.
there's a flare up in the Middle East, every time they try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz or attack a tanker, or just all the crazy little games with the rebels and Hezbollah, and then down in gosh, even in Africa. I mean, they've had training areas when you talk about even as far down in Venezuela. So there's this little axis of evil that all kind of tied together. Like no one in the Middle East is really a big fan of that Iranian regime. So I think you've seen that
hmm
reflected in their support for operations. Of course, Iran just went crazy and started attacking everyone. I mean, which doesn't even make a lot of sense either. But you're not dealing with rational actors. They're a different type of crazy than what you'll usually see with crazy people.
I agree with the part that they did start attacking multiple different targets, which was pretty bizarre and um, was
I mean, it
not
doesn't even make
expected,
sense.
to be
Like you're
honest.
attacking your neighbors. That if you were trying to garner some type of support or make a victim of yourself, taking everyone
Yeah,
down with you generally is not a good idea.
definitely. It definitely put them on like on the bad side of their neighbors, and I understand why they did it. They're focusing on mainly targeting US assets within those countries because in the end, all of these countries do have US assets. They are
Mhm.
unequivocally Iran is basically surrounded by the US whether through their allies or through their assets itself. So somehow the US has found its way to completely surround Iran over the years, and basically any targets they do take
At the
are
request of
definitely
most of
US
those
targets.
nations. Yeah, yeah. At the request of most of those
Yeah,
nations for their security. I mean, it's it's it's
yeah,
it's a
exactly.
win-win on both sides for each of them, obviously.
Of course. I mean, definitely the US has definitely contributed to a lot of defense systems within the region. Um, but at the same time, I'm trying to see the perspective of the Iranians, how they are thinking when they are feeling that they are surrounded and constantly being pressured by a powerful nation such as the US, telling them, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot use your resources, you're sanctioned, you're constantly being restricted, um, you're constantly under the threat of a potential attack or a war. Because in the end, it's not just Iran that's contributing to this. The US is also contributing as well. I mean, when when the current regime came into power back in the 80s for the revolution, there was a play that was done by the US beforehand, where because Iran was trying to nationalize their oil supply, and this was not in favor for the US, because at that time the US and Iran had they had like specific alliances and specific treaties,
Yeah.
or I
Business.
think
I
it
mean,
was mainly
that's,
private companies.
yeah.
Yeah, it's basically the
Economics
business
play a huge
interests.
part of that.
Exactly. And then Iran wanted to, not allow that. So the US definitely got involved and wanted to. This was back in the 50s actually, and then they put in the Shah instead of the previous prince. I need to. So there's definitely the US involvement from even before the creation of the regime, but this shows that there is a bit of a monopoly effect, a domino effect that eventually leads to the existence of this regime in the first place, because there is resentment that's being built. There is um, a look that, oh, this foreign nation is trying to control us, and that fosters, extremists. This it unites them to kind of take over and then says like, no, we are our own. We want to do things our way. We don't want to listen to a foreign nation. And that's kind of like the concept that I'm trying to approach here in the conversation, that the US, I think, over involves itself in external affairs to the degree where it leads to more negative results than positive. And I wanted to see your perspective on that topic, on that specific statement.
Yeah, yeah. So it's starting in the first one, you talk about kind of the. I think it's really important to separate out that Iranian regime from the Iranian people.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
completely separate there. So when you talk about just the Iranian regime and their concerns that there was too much influence from all the countries around them, which may not have been influenced by the United States, at some point when everybody around you is kind of pissed off at you and they think you're a little crazy, you probably are. So, at some point, this, oh, I don't get along with this neighbor, I don't get along with this neighbor, and like, oh, now it's this neighbor. When everybody around you is telling you the same thing and not happy with you, a little pissed off, you got to look inside here. You're probably doing something wrong.
So true.
And so that's, I don't know what else to tell you on that one. I mean, the entire world, unless you're China or Russia, not a lot of people were happy with that Iranian regime. And then,
Hmm.
of the percentage of people within that regime, I mean, I don't even know what official numbers would be, but I would say the vast, vast number of the Iranian people were not okay with any of that either. Because, just you saw over the last month or two where the economic policies and obviously the sanctions were having just a horrific effect, which would be much preferred if we could have handled this diplomatically or economically and got them out of power than having to have war, right? I got a question asked at an event here earlier this week, and they said, do you like the Iran war?
Mm.
Do I like the Iran war? Like, my God, like nobody likes war. And I
Hmm.
have carried body bags. I've seen horrible things. Nobody wants war. But when that regime put themselves in such a position, everybody in the entire world is pissed off at them except for China and Russia. I mean, they're giving all of their drone technology to Russia. Russia's using that in Ukraine. We've been able to reverse engineer that actually. But, I think the president, President Trump really went above and beyond what a lot of people would have done to try to handle that diplomatically. I mean, he really prides himself on those deals. And I'm telling you, Iran came to the table there just completely no lack of faith. I mean, just they had every intention of just telling them to shove off. We're going to get nuclear weapons. You can't stop us. And I mean, he gave it the good college try there, and it just clearly was not going to be the mode that was going to work. So, generally in the United States, we've got our four instruments of power and diplomatic, informational, military, economic. When you talk in foreign policy, and some,
Right.
I think a lot of people, the economics speak a lot, and you can influence policy there. And then you kind of made that comment on the United States at times gets too involved, like around the world, um, for their own specific interests. And there's zero question there. Like Trump is all about America first, and that's how he carries his foreign policy. So yeah, there's no question about that. But having to do the military strikes in Iran was not an option. I mean, I think anybody having that intelligence and seeing what was happening, and then you've got their envoy walking in and saying that right to your face, like, wow, I thought we were going to try to work on this, guys, but they literally got to have two parties to tango there. You have to have two people that actually have good faith in negotiations, and there clearly was not. But he gave it quite some time, and then that really forced his hand. He didn't have much of a choice.
So what about the point? So there's actually two things I want to go for. The
Mhm.
first thing that I want to mention is um, how everyone around Iran thinks that they're crazy. So I wanted to first ask, what is the outlook on the US? What do you think the neighbors of the US think about it? Do they, what is
That's
everyone
a
else's
great point.
perspective on them?
Yeah, that's a great point. So when you're looking at that American policy, there had been so much in the interest of money and special interests and lobbyists that the actual American people themselves had been overlooked so much, and that's kind of that's a victim of democracy in that there's been a couple of Supreme Court decisions where you can have completely unlimited funds coming in from special interests and corporate.
Hmm.
I forget the name of the court decision right off the top of my head, but that's a kind of a unique thing in America that the American people were getting left in the dust and really getting taken advantage of. So there's a lot of really bad trade deals all over the world, and it's just so corporations could make money, and there's a huge disadvantage to the American people themselves. And I think the big draw of like President Trump, even though he really makes some decisions at times that pisses off the neighbors around you, and I certainly don't agree with all of those, but at the core, putting America first, um, we had been the doormat in just some previous presidents. When you look at Obama and you look at Biden, and even going back like President Bush and President Clinton, there's some decisions that have been made that have made life difficult for Americans. Now I realize, like having been all over the world, that Americans have a much higher quality of life than just about anywhere else on the planet.
Hmm.
So it's really kind of that perception is their reality for sure. But those policy decisions a lot of them have been like really good for America, maybe not so good for the rest of the world. But when you understand his actual policy is just putting America first, period, and talking about American just national security issues. So just looking at President Trump, like whether people like him or not, may be one of the most consequential presidents that we've had in quite some time. So when you look at Venezuela, taking out Maduro and putting a chokehold on the Chinese, like in our Central American region, Panama Canal, Venezuela, that is going to have a domino effect because now it's choking out Cuba and another communist regime. And now you've taken down this Iranian regime. So you have to look at the entire picture there. Like America and really the world is clearly in a much safer place than it was just a year ago or 2 years ago, because those Chinese threats. I spent some time in Australia as well. I was there during one of their big trade wars that was going on, but China is a just a monster economy that just wants to subjugate everyone else in the world to their like um, that ancient Silk Road, and they want the world to just like pivot around and be centered around China. So I don't know if you get too much into China policy there, but that's obviously one of our biggest national security threats right now. So that's something we study a lot. But it's a whole picture. And in doing that, we've restricted. So China really only has a 100-day oil reserve. They
Mm.
have such a huge juggernaut of an economy that they just can't possibly keep those stores. So all of these actions is choking down China right now, and that will likely prevent, if not significantly delay, their invasion of Taiwan. And so that would disrupt the entire like Asian region. And so now we just really got
Mm.
this bad actor Putin, and he's got himself in this quagmire down in Ukraine. So with all the craziness, whether you agree with Trump or not, the big picture and the big chess game, the world is clearly a safer place right now. So it might piss off some of the neighbors around you, but when you look at the surrounding, like the entire world and how that really changes economic policy and really national security, it makes Asia feel a lot better. I can assure you, because there's always those threats from China, the Philippines, Australia, Taiwan for sure. So Yeah, crazy though. That's world economics in 5 or 10 minutes there.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot happening internationally, but
Yeah.
with the statement of the world being a safer place, I don't think I can fully agree with that. Mainly because, for example, I'm living in the Middle East and I'm seeing what's happening, and
Oh yeah.
Trump promised that there would be no wars. He would stop everything. He would end it all. But if anything, the only thing I'm seeing is escalations. Maybe it's different from the
I hope
perspective
your
of
I
someone
hope your
who,
family I hope your family and everybody is okay.
luckily, they're safe. My
Good.
sisters, like, were very close to one of the bombings in
Mm,
Lebanon. And that's a whole different story because that does not involve Iran.
yeah.
Um, but my point is, with that statement being made that the world is safer, the people who are actually experiencing these wars do not feel safer. If anything, they're feeling even more scared. Uh, like my family is constantly there. They used to sleep at like 1 a.m., maximum 2 a.m. Now we're staying up to 5, 6 a.m. just watching the news, hearing of a new bombing that's happening in Lebanon, or even something in this. Like, I never thought that I would be hearing rocket interceptions in Saudi, and the U.S. primes itself as the world policing force, but to be honest, it's currently failing at that. Like, this is just a perspective of someone who's actually witnessing this stuff and experiencing it firsthand.
Yeah.
Trump's promised to stop all the
Regionally,
wars, but they're
yeah,
increasing.
regionally where you're at is probably the worst place in the world to be right now. And if you look at that short term, like it's clearly less safe there with all
Mm,
the activity going on. But had it been nuclear, it would be a gazillion times worse. So, how far or how close do you let them get to that nuclear weapon before you have this type of interaction? I can promise you, this is kind of what this would be like one of the I told you so type of moments that you just never, ever, ever want to encounter or think about. But had this action not been taken, and there had been a nuclear blast anywhere in the Middle East, I'm telling you, it would have been horrific. Like you ever seen Terminator 2? Right, right.
Oh yeah.
yeah,
The AI figures everything out, and they, you know, hit back and just kind of start a nuclear war. Nobody wants to see that. And as terrible as it is now, when you see bombings, or you have family that are close to some of these rocket attacks,
mm,
man, it's that's terrible. And I hate to see that. You know, I've served in the Middle East, but the threat of nuclear war really is much worse. And so when you look at the kind of whole world picture and even the Middle East picture, you know, this is clearly the lesser of those two evils then, because war is never good. You know, nobody likes war.
definitely, war is never good, and we hope that the countries find a way to solve this and figure it out,
Yeah,
because then
yeah,
we're just
there's still
pawns in it.
hope. Still hope.
Yeah. Something that I did want to go into was, um, we were talking about the lifestyle for Americans and how you mentioned that it's improving under President Trump based on the decisions that he's making. Um,
Well, even just on the whole,
for
that
me,
the American quality of life is so much better than the majority of the world. You know, we certainly recognize that.
mhm,
Most definitely.
yes, definitely in general it is, but something that I've been maybe this is just me because I don't live in the US, but most of the media that I receive is mainly negative from within the US. Even when I have conversations with Ali about what's happening, it's like, detention camps, ICE, people getting killed, even if they are legal citizens, they have their passports, they have their citizenships, um, bounty hunters being hired by to represent the as federal agents or and all of these different things that are coming out just makes me think, is the U like is Saudi, while it's going through a war right now, safer than what's happening in the US? Like, what's going on? That's
Yeah,
my thought
and
process
that's
when I hear about what's
yeah,
happening in the
that's
US,
the
and this is with Trump as president.
yeah, and that's a lot of the media and the propaganda. So
Hmm.
I just finished. I flew out to Tasmania in Australia,
Wow.
and it
Yeah.
was because I'm boarded in Australasia as well. So I did a week out in Tasmania. Got to tour some fantastic whiskey facilities as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had an ulterior motive for the trip. I, checked out some amazing Tasmanian whiskeys and then worked in the emergency department. And probably the second or
Yeah.
third shift in, everybody's getting a little more comfortable. They know you better. And so now they want to ask about American politics, right? Because Australia is more fascinated with American politics than Americans are.
Everyone is.
Oh, it's crazy. So I sat
Yeah.
down and,
Definitely curious.
yeah, this is another consultant. And he said, hey, I thought about visiting the US, but I just see how crazy it is. And they're just shooting people and this whole ICE stuff. And I'm like, oh man. So there's the propaganda. So literally. And so I asked him, I was like, well, tell me what you know about Renee Good. And he's like, well, she's, the ICE shot her in Minneapolis. I'm like, okay, all right. Have you watched any of the video? And then, people will, it's like watching American football. Everyone wants a different highlight, oh, well, this shows it from this angle, that shows it. They just only show. So if you look at that in its totality, all right, nobody wanted that to happen. Horrible, horrible thing. But Renee Good went to a training course on how she could be a professional agitator for ICE. She interjects herself in ICE operations where they were actually arresting a legitimate criminal pedophile. So their take on it is like, oh, and there's no such thing as illegal immigration and everyone is welcome. Well, that's just not reality. So he was an illegal immigrant. He had a criminal record and there was some sexual assault charges and some things like that. So this is definitely a dude that needed to be outside of the country. But those ICE agitators don't know that, right? I mean, they don't know who they're going to arrest. Mm-hmm. So they pester ICE all day long, block them in with their cars, interrupt operations. So that's literally obstructing a police officer. That is a crime. You can go to jail for that. And the police just ignore her. Finally, she pushes him to a limit and gets so freaking ridiculous and causing so much of a ruckus. They're like, ma'am, that's enough. Step out of the car. You're under arrest. She ignores them. So she disobeys lawful orders. And you can see on the camera, so the chest camera of the officer, she smokes him with her car. And you can hear the thud. So he later went to the emergency department, had some internal hemorrhaging, had a CT scan. He had some pretty serious injuries. And so when you see the view from the side, like at an angle, it's kind of like this little brush. And then she hits him with her car. And you can hear the amount. He's like, oh, and he pulls out his weapon and he shoots her. So when the way a lot of the American media like spun that and went out internationally, because that's in Australia, they're like, oh, I'm like, yeah, she hit him with her car. Like, who in their right mind thinks it's okay to hit a police officer with your car? I have a 100% expectation. If I ever intentionally run over a police officer, I expect to be shot. Okay, there's no, I don't know why anyone in the world would think it's okay to physically run over a police officer. Oh, was she just trying to get away? Oh, you mean she's trying to flee arrest? So the rationale behind it, you hit a cop with your car, and I'm sorry you got shot. It's terrible. Nobody wants to see that happen. But it's not like they just pulled out a gat and shot somebody gang style. But that's what people think overseas. And so I just, kind of just taught about the other side of that, because the media only tells one story. And in the United States, things are so polarized. So you only get like the left media or the right media. There's really not a lot of non-partial media. Like if you get some BBC reporting and some things, generally those can be pretty truthful. Although the BBC just had a big lawsuit in the last couple of months of how they spun some things and edited video when they were posting. But it's pretty crazy. So things are way safer in the United States than anyone outside of the United States realizes. We have a 125-year low in crime. So in like murder rates, violent crime, rape, sexual assaults, 125-year low. That's not inconsequential. That's actually a really big deal and does have a lot to do with taking criminals off the streets and extraditing individuals that have no business being here in the country with criminal records. It's not everybody. Not every illegal immigrant is not a criminal. But when you enter the country illegally, that literally is a crime. So there's U.S. code. I think it's Title 8, section blah, blah, blah. But when you enter the United States illegally, that is criminal action. And so you can be, taken out of the country for that. So ICE just needs to be let to do their job. And certainly there's, you hear stories of too much force, or, it happens anywhere where there's policing. I've seen some of those, like in Australia and New Zealand as well, certainly not to the level that we have in the United States, but we had so much crime. You talk about a town like Chicago, where just you could just be out having a normal day, and there's so much gang activity and just gun violence that I don't understand how you wouldn't want those types of people that, if they are here illegally, or having those people with criminal records being taken out of the country. They tried to tie the whole ICE operations into just immigration in general. That's how the left spins that. Oh, you're just anti-immigrant. Like, no, no. We love immigrants. I love immigrants. My wife's whole family are immigrants. They're from Cuba. Her both
Wow.
parents immigrated. So we need immigration. We love immigration. Republicans love immigration. We don't like illegal immigration. So what you'll hear
Hmm.
the media is they tie the two together, and then it's hard to piece out what was what. So everything is about immigration, and ICE. And no, 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 no. They're completely separate issues. It's all about illegal immigration. If you can't control who's coming into your country, you don't have a secure country. Like every bad dude in the world knew under the Biden administration that you could take a flight to Mexico and hop across the border. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of really bad actors on terror watch lists that entered the country and are just laying in wait right now because of that insane policy. And so Trump put a stop to that immediately. Um, Interesting fact: one of the largest, largest embassies for Iran anywhere in the world is in Mexico.
Wow.
There's not a lot of Iranians in Mexico, so why? All right, so hey, you can ask those questions yourself. But I mean, just the fact is, America is way safer. 125-year lows in crime, but the media won't tell you that because they just hate
Yeah.
Trump so much they won't give him credit for anything. Like, I feel personally that he legitimately stopped World War III. And when you have the intel and the stuff that I have, I'm telling you, it was a powder keg. It was very dangerous. This had to be done. He stopped World War III. He saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, legitimately. But the left will never admit that. They'll just keep spouting off craziness, and they want to keep it focused on immigration. It's never about immigration. It's about illegal
Mm.
immigration, but they just mix the two together.
Maybe after the podcast, behind the curtain, you can tell us this intel that you're mentioning. You can share it
No,
with
I
us.
cannot, unfortunately, but yeah.
No, no, no. All jokes. Um, Ali, would you like to take over from
Yeah,
here
I
for a bit?
just a lot of politics talks, but I do want to comment on your
Yeah,
books and this book too about the heart of a leader. I think it's so
yeah,
important to teach young boys and kids in general to be leaders and to have good role models and to realize that it's not easy to do the right thing, but um, you have to because it's
yeah,
what's moral and what's right. And I think it's so awesome that you're doing more of that. Do you have more of these books? What inspired you to make this book, and do you
yeah.
have more in the process?
I do. So, this is when you talk about leadership and development, so that it transcends politics, it transcends boundaries. I mean, everyone like benefits from having better leaders in their community. So, just and this is not a problem unique to the United States. I mean, across the world. Like I've practiced overseas. I've been Middle East,
Hmm.
Africa, Australia, New Zealand. This generation right now, they were raised on iPads. Everything is about technology, and just having they don't even have face-to-face interactions. I mean, they literally will sit next to each other and be texting each other back and forth. And when you say, "Hey, well, back in my day, we didn't have iPhone," it's not helpful. It doesn't help. So their anxiety and depression, and then the suicide rates, are much higher in this younger generation, like across the world. And we need to do something about that. So the first book that I wrote, "Be the Weight Behind the Spear," was just getting
Hmm.
people to engage their communities and volunteer and coach soccer, baseball, like football, right? Real soccer, football. I coached some of my kids when they were little, playing soccer, and getting involved in your churches and communities, and just wherever you're at in the world. Those are positive things. And when I decided to turn that into the children's book. So that's the Be the Weight series. This is the
Mm-hmm.
first book, The Heart of a Leader. And then the second book, we're about done. We're going to start on some of the illustrations, is about just perseverance. And then the next book will be on like integrity and just these basic fundamental things that just aren't being taught anymore. And someone has to do something. And so, like I said, as an emergency doctor, I deal with these issues, and I sit down and I cry with a lot of families, I'm telling you. And then as a military commander, I think we need to start earlier. So when you wait until they're 20, 21, 22 years old, it's a lot of yelling, it's a lot of push-ups, it's a lot of additional duties. When you're talking that military, we need to start when they're 5 years old. And so this is a great book that has a Disney illustrator. Her name is Joe Yakovetic, amazing illustrator. And if you guys, or if there's any movie fans out there, like Disney movies, he did illustrations for Lilo and Stitch
Oh
and
wow,
The Little Mermaid. So he did
incredible!
all of the promotional deal and coloring books. And I mean, just he's a like world class illustrator. And I can't believe he jumped in on this book with me, but he has that vision and felt that this was such an important topic that just doesn't have a lot out there right now. I'm very excited to have him on my team.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to see more of the books. I think it's so important to teach kids, to do the right thing. Um, we don't get a lot of those messages out nowadays, so it's so important to focus on that and spread it out. I did have one last question from my end
Sure.
before we wrap up the pod soon about medical workers in the Middle East. The past
Mm,
couple of years have been some of the bloodiest times for medical workers in the Middle East.
yeah.
Rescue workers and medics and Red Cross and you know ambulance people just dying. So, do you think we need to bring back protections for them, or what are your thoughts
Well, I
on all
mean,
that for the war?
you know, generally, right, medical personnel, even during combat and conflicts, they're supposed to be protected. That was the Geneva Conventions, right?
Mm-hmm.
That nobody nobody pays attention to that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You can see what's going on, like obviously, like Middle East and even in
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine. So there's some organizations like Doctors Without Borders is a French organization. Medicine Sans Frontières. I think medical people have that just that within them to heal and help. And I'm certainly a part of that. I serve in the military and take a lot of pride. I worked with surgeons as well. We'd be flying helicopters, and you know, even the guys that were making bombs and screwed up and blew themselves up, still got great medical care. And
Wow.
I saw that, and and people don't understand that sometimes. Like, hey, well, dude, that's the enemy. How could you? Like, man, this is we hold ourselves to higher standards, and we take care. As an emergency doctor, I have taken care of drunks that just killed people. I have taken care of you know people driving DUIs that just ran over a whole family,
Oof.
and it conflicts you. The worst one I ever saw, I'm telling you, I was a resident in Akron, Ohio, and there was a case, some drunk asshole just this is in a more rural area of Ohio, just ran into a whole buggy of Amish. I mean, but this car just smoked
Oof.
an entire horse and buggy carriage, and
Oh
it
my
was it
God.
was a family, and the father was killed, the mother was severely injured and pregnant,
Mm.
and the a couple of children were killed. I mean, in this population, like in the Amish, that you do see a lot of elevated levels of some genetic disorders, and this family hemophiliacs.
Mm-hmm.
So this drunk asshole really just crushed an entire buggy of hemophiliacs, a whole family. And then he
Oof.
comes into the emergency department, and as pissed off as you are at this guy, you still got to take care of him. You got to be a professional. So it's hard sometimes, believe me, but I think that's what medical personnel pride themselves on, having that compassion and just taking care of people on both sides. Sometimes it's not easy, but they need to have that protection. I think they get targeted a lot, especially in combat. The Russians are just decimating, and they've had to get really inventive in Ukraine. All the medical personnel for evacuations, and even using some drone technology. It's pretty impressive what they've really invented on the battlefield. But yeah, they should have protections.
Awesome. That's for my last question, Said, on you.
Um, I don't have any more questions, but I was hoping that maybe Dr. Josh could spare us a few words for our audience, uh, especially maybe something, a positive statement that people
Yeah,
can take after this podcast.
absolutely. So, regardless of where you live, like your surroundings, that political environment, or where in the world you're at, what you do matters every single day. Everybody has a different set of gifts. Everyone is blessed with different gifts that your community needs. So if that's coaching, get out there and coach some little league soccer or cricket, or you just get out there and coach, or get involved in your schools or your churches or community centers. There's people out there that just don't like people in general, right? Maybe you're a little bit more reclusive. Get out there and go to an animal shelter. Like those
Hmm.
animals can be emotional support animals for somebody.
Hmm.
So regardless, everyone has a special set of gifts. Everybody is unique. What you do really does matter. So please get out there in your community.
Fantastic. And guys, please don't forget to check out Dr. Josh's website, support his campaign. We want to make him a governor because to be honest, you're actually one of the few politicians that seems like a genuinely good person. So
Oh, well,
we hope for
thank
you the
you. Yeah,
best.
thank you.
And
And we've got a nonprofit organization as well. If you go to
mhm,
waitbehindthespear.com, WEIGHT, waitbehindthespear.com, you can learn more.
fantastic. Dr. Josh, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for
Guys,
your
thank you
time,
for
Dr.
watching.
Josh.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
you.
gentlemen. I appreciate it.
And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
We're out. Thank you. Really appreciate your time.